March 15th, 1987, Cumberland Valley, Pennsylvania. A quiet Sunday morning that would mark the beginning of a mystery spanning over 3 decades. Robert Hayes, a 48-year-old blacksmith respected throughout the community, failed to appear for Sunday service at the local Methodist church. For a man known for his punctuality and dedication, this absence immediately raised concerns among those who knew him well. So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from. His wife Michelle discovered the locked workshop behind their property that afternoon. The heavy wooden door remained secured from the inside, an unusual detail that would later prove significant to investigators. When local authorities arrived to conduct a welfare check, they found no signs of forced entry. The workshop appeared undisturbed at first glance. Inside, however, a different picture emerged. Tools lay scattered across the workbench in organized chaos. The forge remained cold, its last fire extinguished days earlier. Most notably, an ornamental iron gate rested unfinished on the main work table, its intricate patterns only partially completed. The piece displayed remarkable craftsmanship, featuring unusual geometric designs that seemed almost symbolic in nature. Robert's personal belongings remained in place. His leather work apron hung on its usual hook. His lunch pail sat unopened on a shelf. Everything suggested he had simply stepped away, intending to return momentarily. Yet Robert Hayes had vanished without explanation. Detective James Morrison of the Cumberland Valley Police Department took charge of the initial investigation. Interviews with family members revealed that Robert had seemed distracted in recent weeks, often working late into the night. Michelle reported finding her husband in deep concentration over project sketches she had never seen before. The financial investigation uncovered an intriguing detail. 5 days before his disappearance, Robert had withdrawn $8,000 in cash from his business account. The bank teller remembered the transaction clearly due to its unusual size. Robert had provided no explanation for the withdrawal, simply requesting the money in $100 bills. Neighbors reported seeing an unfamiliar dark sedan parked near the Hayes property on multiple occasions during the 2 weeks prior to Robert's disappearance. The vehicle's occupants remained unidentified. One witness recalled seeing Robert speaking with 2 men in business suits outside his workshop, an uncommon sight in the typically casual environment of the metalworking district. The local community of artisans and craftsmen offered their own observations. Several mentioned that Robert had been working on special commissions for unnamed clients, projects he discussed only in vague terms. His usual openness about his work had given way to uncharacteristic secrecy. As March gave way to April with no sign of Robert Hayes, the investigation began to shift. The absence of ransom demands ruled out kidnapping for financial gain. No body had been discovered. No evidence of foul play emerged from the workshop examination. The case began to take on the characteristics of a voluntary disappearance, though those closest to Robert insisted such an action contradicted everything they knew about the man. The breakthrough in the initial investigation came from an unexpected source. Joshua Hayes, Robert's 16-year-old son, finally revealed information he had been reluctant to share. In the weeks before his father's disappearance, Joshua had overheard heated discussions between Robert and visitors to their home. The conversations had taken place behind closed doors, but the tension in the voices had been unmistakable. Joshua recalled his father using words like obligation and dangerous knowledge, phrases that now took on ominous significance. But the young man's testimony raised more questions than it answered. Who had Robert been meeting with? What knowledge had he possessed that might be considered dangerous? And most critically, had Robert Hayes chosen to disappear or had that choice been made for him? The spring of 1987 brought intensive investigative efforts as Detective James Morrison and his team worked to unravel the mystery of Robert Hayes's disappearance. The case, initially treated as a missing person investigation, began revealing layers of complexity that suggested something far more troubling beneath the surface. Financial records became the focus of the investigative team's attention. Bank statements spanning the previous 18 months showed a pattern of irregular deposits into Robert's business account. Amounts ranging from $1,500 to $5,000 appeared at inconsistent intervals, always in cash deposits made personally by Robert. When investigators cross-referenced these deposits with Robert's invoicing records, they discovered significant discrepancies. Many of the cash deposits had no corresponding client invoices or project documentation. The forensic examination of Robert's workshop yielded minimal physical evidence: no blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of violence. The building's interior showed only the typical wear and dust of a working metalworking facility. However, investigators noted something peculiar about the layout. Measurements of the interior dimensions revealed a discrepancy with the exterior measurements. Approximately 6 feet of space remained unaccounted for, suggesting the possible existence of a concealed area within the structure. Interviews with Robert's client base produced a consistent portrait of a skilled craftsman who took pride in his work. Custom gates, decorative railings, restoration projects for historical buildings throughout Cumberland Valley and the surrounding counties. Yet, several clients mentioned that Robert had declined new projects in recent months, citing a commitment to a major commission that required his full attention. None could identify the client for this mysterious project. The local business community provided additional context. Several shop owners near Robert's workshop reported seeing the same dark sedan that neighbors had mentioned. One merchant recalled the vehicle's license plate beginning with the letters WG, though the complete number eluded memory. Pennsylvania motor vehicle records from that era proved too voluminous to narrow down without additional information. Michelle Hayes cooperated fully with investigators, providing access to personal documents and correspondence. Among Robert's personal effects, detectives found a small notebook containing what appeared to be coded notations. Series of letters and numbers filled the pages, interspersed with rough sketches of mechanical components. A consulting cryptographer from the state police examined the notebook but found no immediately recognizable cipher pattern. The codes, if that's what they were, remained impenetrable. As summer approached, the investigation expanded to include the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The cash deposits, the mysterious clients, and the possibility of interstate activity brought federal interest. Agents interviewed business associates across Pennsylvania and neighboring states. The expanded investigation uncovered that Robert had traveled to Philadelphia and Pittsburgh multiple times in the year before his disappearance, trips he had not mentioned to his family. The FBI's involvement brought additional resources but few answers. Financial crime specialists examined whether Robert might have been involved in money laundering or other illegal activities. The evidence remained inconclusive. Robert's deposits, while irregular, didn't match typical patterns of criminal proceeds. His tax filings, though somewhat incomplete, showed no red flags that would indicate serious financial crimes. By autumn of 1987, the active investigation began to wind down. With no body, no clear evidence of foul play, and no concrete leads pointing toward criminal activity, the case entered a frustrating limbo. Detective Morrison continued following occasional tips, but the trail had gone cold. The FBI closed their file, finding insufficient evidence of federal crimes. Joshua Hayes, now 17 and preparing for his final year of high school, struggled with his father's absence. In follow-up interviews, he provided additional details about the overheard conversations. He recalled his father mentioning something about compartments and secure storage, terms that meant little at the time, but suggested Robert's work might have involved more than decorative metalwork. The case officially transitioned to inactive status in early 1988. Robert Hayes's name entered databases of missing persons. His photograph circulated through law enforcement channels. Michelle filed for a declaration of death in absentia, though the legal process would take years to complete. The family held a memorial service, seeking closure without a body to bury. The unfinished ornamental gate remained in Robert's workshop, covered with a tarp, a silent testament to interrupted work. The geometric patterns in its design continued to puzzle those who examined it. Some suggested the shapes held symbolic meaning, perhaps related to Masonic traditions or other fraternal organizations. Others saw simply the artistic expression of a skilled craftsman. Yet, one detail from the investigation file would prove prophetic. A junior detective had noted in his report that the workshop's unexplained spatial discrepancy deserved further examination. The observation, buried in hundreds of pages of investigative documents, went unaddressed as the case went cold. 3 decades would pass before anyone would discover what Robert Hayes had been hiding behind the walls of his workshop, and why that secret had cost him everything. August 2023. 36 years after Robert Hayes vanished from his workshop, the old building stood weathered but intact on the outskirts of Cumberland Valley. The property had changed hands twice over the decades, serving briefly as storage space before sitting vacant for nearly 15 years. Christopher Sanders, a 34-year-old metalworker specializing in architectural restoration, purchased the property with plans to establish his own fabrication business. The building's solid construction and spacious layout made it ideal for his purposes, despite requiring significant renovation work. The renovation process began with addressing structural concerns and updating electrical systems. Christopher hired a local contractor to assess the foundation and interior walls. During the initial walkthrough, the contractor noted inconsistencies in the building's dimensions, the same discrepancy that investigators had documented decades earlier but never fully explored. Christopher decided to investigate personally. Armed with measuring tools and building plans obtained from county records, he confirmed the spatial anomaly. The workshop's interior measurements fell approximately 6 feet short of what the exterior dimensions suggested. The missing space ran along the entire eastern wall of the building. Careful examination of the eastern wall revealed subtle irregularities in the brick pattern. Certain sections showed slightly different mortar coloring, suggesting repair or modification work performed after the original construction. Christopher began tapping along the wall, listening for hollow sounds that might indicate empty space behind. The discovery came on a humid afternoon in mid-August. Behind a heavy metal shelving unit that had been bolted to the wall, Christopher found a section where the mortar had deteriorated slightly. Using a small pry bar, he carefully removed several loose bricks. Behind them lay not solid wall, but darkness. Working methodically over several hours, Christopher dismantled enough of the false wall to reveal a narrow doorway. The opening led to a concealed room approximately 6 feet wide and 20 feet long, running parallel to the main workshop. The space had been expertly hidden, accessible only by someone who knew exactly where to look. Inside the hidden room, Christopher found a time capsule of Robert Hayes's secret work. Metal shelving lined both walls, holding tools of exceptional quality and specialization. precision measuring instruments, custom-made drill bits, specialized grinding wheels, and welding equipment far more sophisticated than the standard tools in the main workshop. These were instruments designed for work requiring extraordinary accuracy. Document boxes filled one entire shelf. Inside, Christopher discovered meticulously organized records spanning years of Robert's work. Leather-bound journals contained detailed sketches of complex mechanical systems. Blueprint-style drawings showed elaborate locking mechanisms, hidden compartments built into architectural elements, and sophisticated safe designs. Each project bore a reference code rather than a client name. Photographs filled several albums, documenting completed installations. Images showed custom-built vaults concealed within walls, floor safes hidden under removable tiles, and security features integrated into seemingly ordinary architectural elements. The craftsmanship displayed in these photographs revealed Robert Hayes as far more than a decorative metalworker. He had been an artist of concealment, creating hiding places that would escape detection from even careful observers. Among the documents, Christopher found what appeared to be a client ledger. Instead of names, entries used only initials, followed by dates and project codes. Payments were recorded in cash amounts, matching the irregular deposits investigators had noted in 1987. The ledger entries ceased abruptly in early March of that year. One journal in particular captured Christopher's attention. Unlike the technical drawings and project specifications in other volumes, this journal contained Robert's personal observations. Entries described growing concerns about certain clients and the purposes for which they intended to use his creations. References to unusual requests and uncomfortable questions suggested Robert had become aware that his skills were being employed for purposes beyond simple security. A manila envelope contained photographs of a different nature. These images showed Robert meeting with well-dressed individuals in various locations around Cumberland Valley, business meetings captured on film, possibly by Robert himself using a camera with a timer, or perhaps by an associate whose identity remained unknown. The men in these photographs appeared prosperous, their clothing and bearing suggesting positions of influence in the community. Tucked into one of the journals, Christopher found a handwritten list of addresses throughout Cumberland Valley and neighboring communities. Next to each address, Robert had noted dates and brief descriptions. The entries mentioned installations completed, follow-up visits, and, in some cases, concerning observations about unusual activity at the properties. Most significantly, Christopher discovered correspondence between Robert and someone identified only as M.W. The letters, written in careful longhand, discussed concerns about legal exposure and potential consequences. One letter referenced knowledge that could prove problematic for certain parties, language that echoed the dangerous knowledge mentioned by Joshua Hayes decades earlier. The final entries in Robert's personal journal dated to March 10, 1987, just 5 days before his disappearance. The writing conveyed a sense of resolution about an impending decision. References to copies made and information secured suggested Robert had taken steps to protect himself or perhaps to ensure certain facts would eventually come to light. Christopher Sanders immediately recognized the significance of his discovery. This was not simply the forgotten workspace of a missing craftsman. This was evidence that might finally explain what had happened to Robert Hayes 36 years earlier. He contacted the Cumberland Valley Police Department that same afternoon. The case file, long dormant in archives, was pulled from storage. Detective Sarah Mitchell, a seasoned investigator specializing in cold cases, took charge of the renewed investigation. When she arrived at the workshop and examined the hidden room's contents, she understood immediately that the Robert Hayes case had just been reopened with unprecedented new evidence. The journals, photographs, and documents represented a roadmap to understanding Robert's final months, but they also raised a chilling question that would drive the investigation forward. If Robert Hayes had possessed knowledge dangerous enough to hide away detailed records and photographic evidence, had that knowledge ultimately cost him his life? And if so, were the people responsible still living in Cumberland Valley, their secrets protected for more than 3 decades? September 2023. The reopening of the Robert Hayes case generated renewed attention throughout Cumberland Valley. Detective Sarah Mitchell assembled a task force combining local investigators with state police resources and forensic specialists. The hidden room's contents provided an unprecedented foundation for investigative work that should have been completed 36 years earlier. The first priority involved cataloging and analyzing every item recovered from the concealed workspace. Forensic document examiners photographed each page of Robert's journals, creating digital records that could be shared among investigators and analyzed without risking damage to the original materials. The reference codes used in place of client names became the focus of intensive decryption efforts. The breakthrough came through painstaking cross-referencing work. Investigators compared the addresses listed in Robert's records with property ownership records from the 1980s. A pattern emerged. Many of the addresses corresponded to commercial properties, office buildings, small warehouses, and retail spaces that had been developed during Cumberland Valley's expansion period in the early to mid-80s. Property records revealed a common thread. A significant number of these buildings had been developed by the same construction and real estate development company, Wilson Properties and Development. The firm had been one of the most active developers in the region during that era, responsible for numerous commercial projects throughout Cumberland Valley and surrounding communities. Further investigation into Wilson Properties uncovered that the company had been owned and operated by Gregory Wilson, now 76 years old and still residing in Cumberland Valley. Wilson had retired from active business operations in the late 1990s, but remained a figure of local prominence. His earlier success in real estate development having established him as a wealthy and respected community member. The photographs found in Robert's hidden room took on new significance when investigators began identifying the individuals pictured with the blacksmith. Facial recognition technology, combined with old business directories and newspaper archives from the 1980s, allowed the task force to put names to several of the faces. Gregory Wilson appeared in multiple photographs, as did Stephen Clark, Wilson's business partner during the height of their development activities. Stephen Clark, now 74, had relocated to Florida after the dissolution of Wilson Properties in the late 90s. Investigators contacted Clark through official channels, requesting an interview regarding his past business relationship with Robert Hayes. Clark initially claimed no memory of ever meeting the blacksmith, a statement that contradicted the photographic evidence in investigators' possession. The coded reference system in Robert's ledger gradually yielded its secrets. The initials used for clients, when combined with project dates and addresses, could be matched to property owners and business operators. The pattern suggested that Robert had been creating sophisticated hidden compartments and security features for various commercial properties. The installations ranged from concealed floor safes to hidden rooms, not unlike the one in Robert's own workshop. Analysis of the time periods revealed something particularly significant. Many of Robert's most complex projects had been completed during 1985 and 86, a period when federal authorities had been conducting investigations into money laundering operations in Pennsylvania. The regional banking crisis of that era had prompted increased scrutiny of cash-intensive businesses and real estate transactions. Financial records from the 1980s, obtained through legal channels and archived bank documents, showed that Wilson Properties had been involved in numerous all-cash transactions during the same period Robert Hayes had been creating his hidden installations. Properties had been purchased and sold rapidly, often at prices that seemed inconsistent with market values of the time. Joshua Hayes, now 52 years old and working as an engineer in Philadelphia, was contacted by investigators. The interview brought back painful memories, but Joshua provided crucial context for his father's final weeks. He recalled overhearing conversations where his father had used terms like liability and exposure. Joshua remembered his father seeming troubled, spending long hours reviewing documents in his home office rather than in the workshop. Most significantly, Joshua recalled a specific incident approximately 3 weeks before his father's disappearance. A well-dressed man had visited their home late in the evening, arriving in a dark sedan. Joshua had been upstairs but had heard raised voices from his father's study. The visitor's voice had carried a threatening tone, though Joshua could not make out specific words. When the man departed, Joshua had found his father sitting at his desk, visibly shaken, staring at documents spread before him. The investigation into Robert's final days revealed additional details. The $8,000 cash withdrawal made 5 days before his disappearance had been followed by visits to 3 different banks in neighboring towns. Security footage from one bank, miraculously still archived after all these years, showed Robert renting a safe deposit box under a name that investigators had not previously associated with him. Obtaining access to that safe deposit box required legal procedures that consumed precious weeks. When authorities finally opened it in late September 2023, they found copies of documents that Robert had apparently created as insurance. Photocopies of building plans showing hidden installations, duplicate photographs of meetings with clients, and most damning, financial records that appeared to document cash transactions tied to specific property addresses. Among these documents, investigators found a handwritten statement by Robert Hayes dated March 8, 1987. The statement outlined his growing awareness that the hidden compartments and secure storage areas he had been creating were being used to conceal proceeds from illegal activities. Robert described pressure from certain clients to remain silent about the true nature of his work. The statement concluded with Robert's declaration that copies of all documentation had been secured and would be released to authorities if anything should happen to him. The statement named Gregory Wilson specifically as the client who had made the most concerning requests and had expressed the most explicit threats regarding the need for absolute discretion. Robert's words, preserved for 36 years, described a final meeting scheduled for March 15, 1987, at a property under development on the outskirts of Cumberland Valley. That date marked the day Robert Hayes had disappeared. The task force immediately focused on identifying the property mentioned in Robert's statement. Cross-referencing development projects active in March 1987 with Wilson Properties records led investigators to a specific address, a commercial building that had been under construction at the time but was subsequently abandoned and never completed. The property, located in an industrial area that had never fully developed as planned, had sat empty for decades. Ownership had transferred through several entities over the years, but records showed the original development had been initiated by Wilson Properties. The building remained standing, though deteriorated and surrounded by overgrown vegetation. As Detective Mitchell organized a search warrant for the abandoned property, another piece of evidence emerged. An anonymous tip delivered through the department's cold case hotline provided information about unusual construction activity at that specific site in the spring of 1987. The caller, who declined to identify themselves, described having witnessed a concrete pour conducted outside normal business hours, with only a small crew present and no inspection performed. The tip mentioned something else that sent a chill through the investigative team. The caller had seen a dark sedan parked at the construction site during that after-hours concrete work, the same type of vehicle that had been observed near Robert Hayes' home and workshop in the weeks before his disappearance. Ground-penetrating radar equipment was deployed to the abandoned property before any excavation began. The technology, far more advanced than anything available in 1987, could detect anomalies beneath concrete surfaces and in soil composition. Technicians scanned the building's foundation and the surrounding area, searching for anything that might indicate disturbed earth or concealed materials. The radar results identified a specific area within the building's foundation that showed density inconsistencies. Something was buried beneath approximately 4 inches of concrete and 3 feet of compacted soil. The anomaly's size and shape were consistent with human remains. On October 3, 2023, excavation began at the site. Forensic anthropologists, supervised as heavy equipment, carefully removed layers of concrete and earth. The work proceeded slowly, each layer documented photographically and examined for evidence before proceeding deeper. What they uncovered beneath that foundation would finally answer the question that had haunted Cumberland Valley for 36 years, and it would transform the Robert Hayes missing person case into a murder investigation that would expose secrets powerful people had believed buried forever. October 3, 2023. The abandoned construction site on the industrial outskirts of Cumberland Valley became the center of intense investigative activity. Forensic teams worked under carefully controlled conditions as excavation equipment removed layers of concrete and compacted earth from the area identified by ground-penetrating radar. The excavation proceeded methodically, each layer photographed and documented before removal. By midday, workers had cleared the concrete foundation and begun removing soil from the anomaly detected beneath. Forensic anthropologists monitored every stage, alert for any indication of what lay buried in that specific location. At approximately 2 in the afternoon, the excavation revealed the first evidence. Fragments of deteriorated fabric appeared in the soil, consistent with clothing that had been underground for decades. The discovery prompted an immediate shift in protocol. Heavy equipment was withdrawn, and the remainder of the excavation proceeded entirely by hand, using tools designed for archaeological precision. Over the following hours, the careful work exposed skeletal remains in a position suggesting the body had been placed rather than buried in a grave. The remains lay within what appeared to be a deliberately created void in the foundation area, a space that had been filled with soil and then covered with concrete during construction. Forensic examination at the scene indicated the remains had been protected from some environmental factors by their placement, allowing for better preservation than would typically occur in ordinary burial. Personal effects found with the remains included a metal belt buckle, deteriorated leather work boots, and fragments of heavy canvas fabric consistent with work clothing typical of the 1980s. Most significantly, investigators recovered a wallet from the remains. Despite decades underground, the leather had retained enough integrity to preserve its contents. Inside, they found a Pennsylvania driver's license issued to Robert Michael Hayes, with an expiration date of March 1991. The photograph on that license matched the missing person photos from 1987. DNA samples were collected immediately and fast-tracked through the state forensic laboratory. Within 72 hours, comparison with DNA obtained from Joshua Hayes confirmed the identity beyond doubt. The remains discovered beneath the abandoned construction site belonged to Robert Hayes, missing for 36 years. Forensic anthropological examination provided additional information. The condition of the remains indicated death had occurred approximately at the time of Robert's disappearance in March 1987. While extensive decomposition limited detailed analysis, forensic experts identified evidence consistent with blunt force trauma to the skull, suggesting homicide rather than accidental death or natural causes. The construction timeline for the property took on critical importance. Building permits and inspection records showed that foundation work had been scheduled for mid-March 1987. However, the final foundation inspection had been noted as incomplete in official records, with the project subsequently abandoned due to financing issues. The concrete pour had occurred during the exact week Robert Hayes disappeared. Armed with this evidence, investigators intensified their focus on Gregory Wilson and Stephen Clark. Financial records from Wilson Properties showed that both men had been actively involved in the construction project where Robert's remains were discovered. Clark had served as the project manager for that specific development. Investigators obtained warrants to examine current financial records and communications for both men. Modern forensic accounting techniques revealed something the 1987 investigation had missed. The commercial properties where Robert Hayes had installed hidden compartments had been part of an elaborate money laundering scheme. Cash from illegal sources had been funneled through property transactions, with the hidden compartments serving to store and move money away from the scrutiny of banking authorities. Federal authorities joined the investigation at this stage as the evidence suggested violations of money laundering statutes that fell under federal jurisdiction. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division reviewed documentation recovered from Robert's safe deposit box alongside modern financial records. The analysis revealed that Wilson and Clark had been operating their scheme throughout the mid-1980s, using real estate transactions to legitimize cash that originated from various illegal enterprises. Robert Hayes had unknowingly become a crucial element in this operation. His skill at creating undetectable hiding places had made the scheme possible, but his growing awareness of how his work was being used had transformed him from useful craftsman to dangerous liability. Interviews with former associates of Wilson Properties yielded additional information. Several former employees, now retired, recalled the abandoned construction project and the unusual circumstances surrounding its suspension. One former construction supervisor remembered being told to stay away from the site during a weekend in mid-March 1987, with Clark personally overseeing a small concrete pour that was not part of the regular construction schedule. The anonymous tip that had directed investigators to the site was eventually traced to this same former supervisor. Age and conscience had prompted him to finally come forward with information he had suspected for decades but had been too frightened to report. His testimony described seeing Gregory Wilson's vehicle at the construction site that weekend, along with the dark sedan that multiple witnesses had placed near Robert Hayes' property. On October 15, 2023, arrest warrants were issued for Gregory Wilson and Stephen Clark. Wilson was taken into custody at his Cumberland Valley residence without incident. Clark was arrested at his Florida home by federal agents working in coordination with Pennsylvania authorities. Both men were charged with first-degree murder, along with multiple counts related to financial crimes and obstruction of justice. The arrests generated significant media attention throughout Pennsylvania. Gregory Wilson, once regarded as a pillar of the business community, now faced life imprisonment. Stephen Clark, who had lived quietly in retirement for 2 decades, found his past catching up with him in his mid-70s. During initial proceedings, Clark's attorney approached prosecutors with an offer. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Clark was willing to provide testimony about the events of March 1987 and the full extent of the money laundering operation. After careful consideration, prosecutors agreed to the cooperation agreement, recognizing that Clark's testimony would be crucial to securing a conviction against Wilson and providing complete closure to the Hayes family. Clark's proffer session with investigators revealed the complete story. Robert Hayes had been creating hidden storage installations for Wilson properties without initially understanding their purpose. As the work continued over several years, Robert had begun noticing patterns. He had seen the same individuals accessing the properties, had observed cash being moved, and had gradually pieced together that his craftsmanship was facilitating illegal activity. In early 1987, Robert had confronted Wilson about his suspicions. Rather than ending their business relationship quietly, Robert had made a critical error. He had mentioned that he had documented all his work and kept copies of everything as protection. What Robert had intended as insurance for his safety had instead signed his death warrant. Wilson had arranged the meeting at the construction site under the pretense of discussing one final installation. Clark had been present, along with another associate whose identity Clark claimed not to remember. When Robert arrived, expecting a business discussion, he instead found himself confronting men who had decided he knew too much to be allowed to live. The confrontation had ended with Robert Hayes' death. His body had been placed in the foundation area, covered with soil, and sealed beneath concrete poured that same night. The construction project had been abandoned shortly afterward, officially due to financing problems, but actually to avoid any future investigation that might disturb the site. For 36 years, Wilson and Clark had believed their secret was safe. The investigation in 1987 had gone cold. Robert's hidden room and safe deposit box had remained undiscovered. The abandoned construction site had deteriorated quietly, drawing no attention. Until Christopher Sanders had purchased an old workshop and begun asking questions about missing wall space. As prosecutors prepared their case for trial, one question remained. The associate Clark claimed had been present, but whose identity he couldn't remember. Investigators suspected this convenient memory lapse concealed someone else involved in Robert Hayes' murder. Whether that individual would ever be identified remained uncertain, but the core of the case was solid. The evidence was overwhelming. Justice, delayed by more than 3 decades, was finally within reach. March 2024. The Cumberland County Courthouse became the setting for the trial that would finally resolve the Robert Hayes case. Prosecutors presented their evidence to a jury that would decide the fate of Gregory Wilson, now 76 years old, facing charges of first-degree murder and numerous financial crimes spanning decades. The prosecution's case built methodically, layer upon layer, mirroring the excavation that had uncovered Robert's remains. Forensic anthropologists testified about the skeletal evidence and the indicators of violent death. DNA experts confirmed the identification beyond any doubt. Construction records and building permits established the timeline of the foundation work that had concealed the body. Christopher Sanders testified about discovering the hidden room and its contents, describing the moment when a routine renovation project became the catalyst for solving a 36-year-old mystery. Detective Sarah Mitchell walked the jury through the investigative process, explaining how each piece of evidence had connected to the next, building a comprehensive picture of what had happened to Robert Hayes. Joshua Hayes, now 53, provided emotional testimony about his father's final weeks. He described his father as a man of integrity who took pride in his craftsmanship and lived by strong moral principles. The realization that his father had been killed for refusing to remain complicit in criminal activity brought painful clarity to decades of unanswered questions. Michelle Hayes, Robert's widow, now 84 years old, attended every day of the trial. She had lived for 36 years with uncertainty, not knowing whether her husband had abandoned his family or met with foul play. The discovery of his remains, while confirming the worst, had also provided the closure she had been denied for more than 3 decades. The prosecution presented the documentation from Robert's safe deposit box, including his handwritten statement outlining his concerns and naming Gregory Wilson specifically. Financial experts testified about the money laundering scheme, explaining how Wilson Properties had used real estate transactions to legitimize illegal cash flows throughout the mid-1980s. Stephen Clark's testimony proved devastating to Wilson's defense. Clark described in detail how Wilson had orchestrated Robert Hayes' murder, fearing that the blacksmith's knowledge threatened to expose their entire operation. Clark acknowledged his own role in the events, expressing remorse but providing crucial insider testimony about Wilson's planning and execution of the crime. The defense attempted to discredit Clark's testimony, pointing to his cooperation agreement and reduced sentence as motivation to fabricate evidence against Wilson. They argued that Clark bore primary responsibility for Robert's death and was now attempting to minimize his own culpability by exaggerating Wilson's role. The strategy found little traction with the jury. Physical evidence corroborated Clark's testimony. The construction timeline matched his account. The location of the remains aligned with his description of where the body had been placed. Most significantly, financial records showed that Wilson had personally approved the abandonment of the construction project immediately after Robert's disappearance, an unusual decision for a project that had already incurred substantial investment. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutors presented over 40 witnesses and hundreds of pieces of documentary evidence. The defense called character witnesses who testified to Wilson's reputation in the business community, but could offer no substantive rebuttal to the murder charges. Wilson himself declined to testify, exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching their verdict. On March 28, 2024, they found Gregory Wilson guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, multiple counts of money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom remained silent as the verdict was read, the weight of 36 years of waiting for this moment evident in the faces of those present. Sentencing occurred 2 weeks later. The judge, noting the premeditated nature of the murder and the decades-long cover-up, imposed the maximum sentence permitted under Pennsylvania law. Gregory Wilson received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, with additional consecutive sentences for the financial crimes. At 76 years old, Wilson would spend the remainder of his life in prison. Stephen Clark, having fulfilled his cooperation agreement, received a sentence of 25 years for his role in the murder and related crimes. While significantly reduced from what he might have faced, the sentence ensured that Clark, now 74, would likely spend his remaining years incarcerated. The question of the third individual allegedly present during Robert Hayes's murder remained unresolved. Investigators continued pursuing leads, but without Clark's cooperation in identifying this person, and with Wilson refusing to provide any information, that aspect of the case remained open. Some suspected the third person had already died in the intervening decades. Others believed he might still be living somewhere, his involvement forever protected by the silence of the two men who knew his identity. For the Hayes family, the trial's conclusion brought complicated emotions: relief that the truth had finally emerged, grief renewed by the confirmation of how Robert had died, anger at the decades of deception that had prevented justice, but also gratitude for the persistence of investigators and the chance occurrence that had led Christopher Sanders to purchase that particular workshop. Michelle Hayes, speaking briefly to media after the sentencing, expressed appreciation for all those who had worked to solve her husband's case. She noted that Robert had died trying to do the right thing, refusing to remain silent about criminal activity even when that decision put him in danger. His integrity, she said, had ultimately been vindicated by the truth coming to light. Joshua Hayes arranged for his father's remains to be properly buried in a ceremony attended by family, friends, and the investigators who had solved the case. The unfinished ornamental gate that Robert had been working on when he disappeared became part of a memorial. Christopher Sanders, using Robert's original designs and techniques, completed the piece. The finished gate was installed at the entrance to the cemetery where Robert was finally laid to rest. The hidden room in Robert's workshop was preserved as part of the historical record. Local historical societies recognized it as evidence of an important case in Cumberland Valley's history. Some of Robert's tools and journals were donated to a regional museum, where they serve as reminders of both skilled craftsmanship and the consequences of becoming entangled with criminal enterprises. The case prompted changes in construction oversight protocols. Pennsylvania authorities implemented new requirements for documenting foundation work and final inspections, making it more difficult to use construction projects to conceal criminal activity. The Robert Hayes case became a study example in forensic investigation courses, demonstrating how cold cases could be solved through combining new technology with methodical re-examination of old evidence. For Christopher Sanders, the experience transformed his relationship with the workshop he had purchased. What began as a simple business investment became a connection to history and a reminder of the importance of asking questions when something seems wrong. He continued operating his metalworking business from the renovated building, honoring Robert Hayes's legacy by maintaining the same standards of craftsmanship the original owner had exemplified. 36 years after Robert Hayes vanished from his workshop, justice had finally been served. The case stood as a testament to the truth that some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually find their way to the surface. And it reinforced the principle that those who lose their lives standing for what is right deserve to have their stories told and their killers held accountable, no matter how many years may pass before that reckoning arrives. The blacksmith who disappeared in 1987, leaving behind an unfinished project and a lifetime of unanswered questions, finally received the justice and recognition he deserved. His story, revealed through the patient work of investigators and the accidental discovery of a hidden room, ensured that Robert Hayes would be remembered not as a missing person, but as a man of principle who paid the ultimate price for his integrity.